I need to tell you something about this file before I read it to you. I have handled a lot of documents in my years with the agency. Confessions, depositions, blackmail letters, death warrants. I have read things that kept me awake for weeks, things that made me reconsider the nature of men and power and what we do to each other in the dark. This one is different. Not because of what it describes. I have read worse, by the measure of blood and suffering. Not because of the men involved, though some of them went on to positions of considerable influence. No. This one is different because of what it implies about the architecture of things, about the layers underneath the layers, about who exactly is running what. My name is Arthur Pendelton. I worked I suppose, though the distinction feels less meaningful every day, as an operative for the Pinkerton National Detective Agency. Before that I served under Sheridan in the Valley. Before that, I was a lawyer's clerk in Philadelphia, reading other men's secrets for a living. You could say I have spent my whole life inside other people's locked rooms. This document came to me through a colleague. He will not be named here. He found it in a collection of suppressed military records, being quietly transferred from one archive to another, sometime in the fall of 1881. He recognized what it was. He understood what it meant. And he mailed it to me with a note that said only, "Pendleton, read this carefully and then burn it. I trust you to know which part of that instruction to follow." I did not burn it. I have been carrying it for 4 months, reading it on train platforms, in hotel rooms. Twice, I fell asleep with it on my chest and woke up with my heart hammering like I would been running from something. I do not dream much anymore, but those 2 nights, I dreamed. I will not describe what I saw. What I am going to do instead is read you this file. The document is a court-martial transcript, Army of the Potomac, dated February of 1863. The case of Private Elias Thorne, Company F, 14th New Jersey Volunteer Infantry. The charge, cowardice in the face of the enemy, dereliction of duty, abandonment of post during engagement. The sentence, death by firing squad. Before I start reading the testimony, I want to tell you something about court-martial transcripts from that period. I have read a few dozen of them in my professional capacity. They are dry documents. Procedural. They list facts the way a carpenter lists lumber. This one is different from the first page. The margins have notes in at least 3 different hands. Someone has underlined certain passages hard, like the pen was angry. Pages 9 through 14 are missing entirely. And the final disposition, the part that tells you what actually happened, is present, but the ink is a different shade than the rest of the document. And the signature at the bottom belongs to a man who, according to official records, was on leave in Washington that week. Someone wrote that ending later. Someone needed the record to say a specific thing. I have been a detective long enough to know the difference between a document that describes what happened and a document that decides what history will say happened. This is the second kind. All right. Let me start with the circumstances. February the 14th, 1863. The Army is wintering outside Falmouth, Virginia, across the river from Fredericksburg. The mood, if the letters home tell it true, is somewhere between despair and mutiny. Burnside's disaster at the Fredericksburg crossing is 6 weeks old. Thousands of men buried in Virginia mud. The mud march finished what the battle started. Morale ground down to something that barely qualifies as a pulse. Officers are drinking. Soldiers are deserting in numbers that the official reports quietly halved before publication. Private Elias Thorne, according to the transcript, was arrested on the 12th of February after failing to appear for a pre-dawn picket assignment. He was found in his tent, not sleeping, not drunk. According to the arresting corporal, whose testimony opens the file, Thorne was sitting cross-legged on his blanket in the dark, eyes open, perfectly still. The corporal says he spoke to him twice. No response. On the third attempt, Thorne turned his head, looked at him, and said, "I know, let us go." That is the first strange thing. The court-martial itself moved fast. 2 days from arrest to verdict. The presiding officer was a colonel named Harlan Marsh. I will come back to Marsh. The charges were read, the witnesses testified, and Thorne offered no defense. Not a word. The transcript notes that he was asked twice if he wished to speak on his own behalf. Both times he shook his head. Sentenced to death. Execution scheduled for dawn, February 16th. Now I want to read you the testimony of the firing squad. This is where the document becomes something else entirely. 8 men were selected. The transcript lists them by name, rank, regiment. I am going to keep those names out of what I read to you, not to protect the innocent, because I am not sure innocent is the right word for any of them, but because 3 of these men are still alive, and 2 of them are currently in positions that would make naming them professionally inadvisable. If you are the kind of person who knows how to read between the lines of things, you will understand why I'm being careful. What I can tell you is that these were not random selections. The 8 men chosen for this detail shared a regimental background, having all served at some point in the same brigade during the early campaigns of 1008-61. Whether that connection was noticed at the time, or whether someone noticed it only afterward, I cannot say, but I have noticed it. It is the first thing I noticed when I read the testimony. The 8 men were assembled at dawn, cold morning. The transcript mentions frost on the ground, which fits with meteorological records for that date in Northern Virginia. Thorne was brought out of the stockade, his hands bound. He was led to the post and secured, blindfolded. Colonel Marsh read the charges aloud. The 8 men stood in formation, rifles at rest. What happens next is where the testimonies all converge, and where they all independently, without apparent coordination, because these men were questioned separately, hours apart, by different officers, tell exactly the same story. I am going to read you 3 of the 8 statements. The first is from a sergeant, the senior man on the detail. His handwriting or his dictation, the transcript does not specify, is steady, no crossings out. He writes, "I was at the far left of the formation. I had done this duty twice before during the war, and 3 times in the Mexican campaign. I was not unfamiliar with what was required. When Colonel Marsh called us to ready, I raised my weapon along with the others. When he called aim, I sighted on the prisoner as instructed. At this point, the prisoner spoke. He did not shout. He spoke at a normal volume, perhaps even quietly, and yet every man on the detail heard him as clearly as I hear my own thoughts. I cannot explain that. What he said, I will not write in full, because I do not believe 'tis appropriate to commit it to paper, and furthermore, I am uncertain whether the act of writing it might carry obligations I am not prepared to accept. I will say only that it was a phrase I had not heard spoken aloud since my initiation. I had not heard it spoken in any context outside of that room in 17 years. When I heard it, I lowered my weapon. I did not decide to lower my weapon. My arms lowered it. I am trying to be precise. I was not confused, or frightened, or surprised. I simply could not fire on a brother. The command to fire was given. I did not fire. I was prepared to face any consequence that followed. The second statement is from a private, youngest man on the detail, 22 years old. His statement is shorter, and this is the detail that kept me awake, slightly different in phrasing. He writes, "He said the words. I do not know how he knew them. I have not heard them since the night they brought me in, and I thought about it afterward, riding to Chancellorsville, and at Cold Harbor. I thought about it again, and I never came to an answer that satisfied me. How did he know? That is what I keep coming back to. He was blindfolded. He could not have seen our faces to know who we were. He said the words in the dark, pointing at nothing, and every one of us heard them land en masse personal. That is the only way I know to say it. They landed personal." The third statement is from a corporal who served with 2 of the other men in the detail in the Maryland campaign. His statement is the longest of the 8 and contains the one detail I find most significant. He writes, "I want to be clear that I am not a superstitious man, and I do not write this to excuse insubordination. I write it because it is what happened." The prisoner spoke words I recognized from my initiation in 1858. They were not approximately the words. They were exactly the words. Exact inflection, exact pause, exact weight on the third syllable of the second phrase, which is specific to our chapter, not universal. I asked one of the other men about this afterward, and he said the same. He heard the inflection of his own chapter. Another man told me he heard the phrasing of the Western lodges, which is different from ours by 2 words. I am saying that each man on that detail heard the phrase in the form specific to his own initiation. I am not in a position to explain this. I record it because I believe someone someday should know. I set the transcript down when I first read that. I poured a glass of water. I drank it. I picked the transcript back up. Let me continue. Colonel Marsh, according to the other testimony in the file, the officers present and the guards stationed at the perimeter reacted to the squad's refusal with what is described variously as fury, disbelief, and something one young lieutenant characterized as fear. That word appears once in the record, added almost as an afterthought, and then the lieutenant seems to have caught himself and crossed it out. But you can still read it through the ink if you hold the page at an angle. Marsh ordered the squad to fire again. They did not fire. He ordered them to attention. They complied, coming to attention with their rifles still at rest, standing straight at fence posts, looking at nothing. He threatened them with hanging. He threatened them with disgrace, with prison, with the end of everything they would build in service. According to the lieutenant's testimony, his voice was rising as he spoke, losing the flat command register that officers work years to develop. At some point he was shouting. The 8 men did not respond. They stood in the frost in the early Virginia morning, and they waited, and Private Thorne, still tied to the post, still blindfolded. The transcript notes that he did not speak again after the initial phrase. He simply waited, along with the rest of them, through whatever was happening. One of the perimeter guards noted, briefly, almost parenthetically, that Thorne appeared to be smiling. Marsh eventually had the squad confined. Thorne was returned to the stockade. The execution was postponed, ending review. That is where the original transcript ends. Now I need to talk about the pages that were added later, ones in the different ink, because here is where the story, already strange, becomes something I do not have clean language for. Overnight, February 16th, into the 17th, something happened at the command level that the record does not explain, and that I have been unable to explain through 4 months of careful investigation. Orders came down, not from division, not from corps, from somewhere above that, somewhere that in the record is referred to only as by direction of higher authority, a phrase that in 1863 Army of the Potomac paperwork could mean the War Department, or it could mean the Commanding General's office, or it could mean other things, depending on who you ask and whether they are willing to talk. Private Elias Thorne was removed from the stockade, not released, not transferred, removed. His records were amended. I do not mean a note was added. I mean his records were amended in a way that required access to multiple separate archives simultaneously, the kind of access that takes other months of bureaucratic effort or a single afternoon with the right authorizations. His name was removed from the muster rolls of Company F. His enlistment record was altered. A pension file that had been opened in his name in Washington was closed with a notation indicating the beneficiary was deceased. Elias Thorne, on paper, died on February 14th, 1863, 2 days before his execution, before he was ever brought to the post, which means that by the time he whispered those words to the firing squad, officially, he was already a dead man, already erased. The 8 members of the firing squad would transfer within the week, not to punishment details, not to labor battalions, not to the kind of assignments that are handed out as reprimand. They were transferred to elite units. I have tracked 4 of them. 1 entered the war as a brevet major. 1 serves as of last year in a significant civilian capacity I'm not going to name. The others I have partial information on, and the partial information suggests they did not suffer. The 8 men who refused a direct order in wartime under threat of hanging and watched a condemned man vanish of night, they were rewarded, not secretly, not with cash or land or anything that could be called a bribe. Rewarded through the ordinary machinery of advancement and opportunity, the kind that is invisible unless you are looking for the pattern. I am very good at finding patterns. I was looking. And Colonel Harlan Marsh, I want to read this section carefully because I want to be precise about what the record says and what I am inferring. Marsh was found in his tent on the morning of February 17th. The official determination was suicide. The record is very clear on this. A brief notation, 2 sentences, listing the official finding and the date of burial. There is no detail about manner. There is no inquiry record, which was standard procedure, even in wartime for officer deaths under unusual circumstances. There is no letter to next of kin in the file, though I have confirmed through other records that Marsh had a wife and 2 children in Ohio. His wife received notification that he had died in the service of his country. The letter mentioned fever. I want to be precise. I am not saying what happened to Colonel Marsh. I am a detective, not a speculator, and the evidence does not permit certainty. What I can say is that man was furious and shouting one evening, threatening soldiers with death, refusing to accept that the machinery he commanded had stopped responding to his commands. And the next morning he was gone, and the machinery closed around him, the way water closes around a stone, and the record smoothed itself out, and within 2 weeks there was essentially no trace that Private Elias Thorne had ever existed, and the men who protected him had been quietly elevated, and the man who tried to destroy him had been quietly erased. I have spent 4 months trying to identify the Brotherhood. I am not going to tell you what I found, because I am also trying to keep my position with the agency, and because 2 of the people I believe are involved are men I've worked with. What I will tell you is that it is old, much older than the Army of the Potomac, much older than the Republic. The ritual structure, from what I can piece together from fragments in the testimony, and from other documents I have spent considerable effort located, has roots that go back in American military culture to the Revolution, and before that to European antecedents that I'm not qualified to trace. What I will tell you is that the phrase Thorn spoke, the phrase that 8 men, questioned separately, all described in different terms, and yet all recognized immediately, that phrase functions as something more than a password. Based on the corporal's statement, the one about how each man heard the words in the form specific to his own initiation, each man heard something slightly different. But each man was certain of what he heard, a phrase that becomes whatever the listener needs it to be, to make them certain of recognition. I keep thinking about that. I keep thinking about what it means to carry a word that can find the right ears in any room, in any situation, even blindfolded, even condemned, even already erased from the official record. The phrase did not prove that Thorn was a brother. It could not have. None of them knew him. None of them had ever met him. What the phrase did was make each of them individually, personally certain. The question I cannot get past, lying awake in hotel rooms with this document on my chest, is how Thorn knew they would be the 8 men. How he knew, standing at the post with his hands tied and his eyes covered, that the men raising rifles at him were men who would hear those words and lower their weapons. The corporal thinks Thorn was lucky, or guided, or something he does not have a word for. I do not think it was luck. I think Elias Thorn knew exactly who was standing in that field. I think he knew before they took him out of the stockade, maybe before they arrested him, maybe long before. I think the phrase was the last step in a plan that began somewhere I cannot see the beginning of, and that the execution order and the court-martial and the home machinery of military justice that moved against him, I think all of it was anticipated, accounted for, maybe even arranged. I do not know why a man would arrange his own court-martial and execution. I have been turning it over for 4 months, and I do not have a good answer. What I have is a hypothesis that frightens me, which is that Thorn needed to vanish, not just from the army, from the record entirely, from his own name, and that the only machinery powerful enough to erase a man that completely, in 1863, was the machinery of official death. He needed to be dead on paper, so he arranged to be sentenced to death. And then he walked out. I'm going to close this file now. I have been reading it to you for a long time, and I want to say one final thing before I put it away. The instinct reading something like this rosts for, life for 24, to wonder who they are, how many of them, what they want, what they are protecting. Those are natural questions, and I spend considerable effort on them, but I think they are the wrong questions. The question that stays with me, the one I fall asleep with, the one that has changed something in the way I look at rooms where I walk into them, at crowds when I pass through them, at men whose handshakes last a half second longer than they need to, is simpler than any of that. How many of them are there? Not in 1863. Now, the firing squad was 8 men, picked apparently at random from the ranks for 200,000-man army, and all 8 of them knew the phrase. All 8 of them had been, at some point in that room, in the dark, had received those words and accepted what came with them. 8 out of 8. That is not a small brotherhood. That is something that has learned to look like the background. I am in Philadelphia now. I have been here 3 weeks. A colleague invited me to dinner last Thursday, a man I have worked with for 6 years, a man I trust professionally and believe I know well. During the meal, handshake, the grip, the specific placement of his thumb, I have been thinking about it since. I have not asked him about it. I am not sure I want to know the answer. I am not sure if he answered, which frightened me more. Some brotherhoods, the document concludes, and I believe this is the one true thing in an official record that is otherwise designed to obscure and redirect and close. Some brotherhoods outrank the United States Army. I am going to put this file back in the envelope now. I am going to seal it. I am going to think, not for the first time, about what my colleague said when he mailed it to me. Read this carefully and then burn it. I trust you to know which part of that instruction to follow. I have read it carefully, and I still have not burned it. Make of that what you will.